Almost 3 years ago, the Digimon 2020 card game released to a big wave of hype. In 2021, it was officially distributed to Western territories, and amidst a combination of TCG marketplace interest and the COVID-19 pandemic, it has managed to weather the storm until today. The 2-year curse is prevalent in TCG, but anything that can break through has a strong chance of holding up against the big three, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, and Magic the Gathering, contending for the coveted 4th slot. With any card game over time, a major factor is how it changes from its earliest days. One need only look at something like early Yu-Gi-Oh! Into the Lynx era or Alpha Magic up until the current War on Phyrexia to see this change in its most intense form. And while Digimon is still a relatively young card game, it's seen a lot of change since the first set and those 3 initial starter decks. So over the course of this video, I want to illustrate what I believe are some of the biggest changes that have happened or will happen to the game. Out of the initial 3 sets, there really wasn't anything too crazy. BT1 just introduced some of the core mechanics like Digimon, Tamers, and Options, BT2 built on this, and BT3 introduced some light things like Security Digimon or some slight mixing of colors in a couple of strategies like Ragnarlord and Imperial Dramon. The seeds for the next major change would be laid in BT4 Great Legend, and while Digimon's 4th set is mostly remembered for the dominance of strategies like BlackWargreymon, it introduced the innocuous hybrid mechanic. 2 cards, Agunimon and Lobomon, effectively vanillas when evoed normally for 2, possess the special ability to evo for a cost of 2 under a red or blue tamer respectively. They also came alongside their slide evolution forms in Burning Greymon and Kendo Garurumon. However, while they evoed for 2 on top of a tamer, their evo for 3 on top of a Digimon was just too much to ask, and even though they did have some okay effects, at the time they really only saw play in the gimmicky hybrid decks. And outside that, for a good period of time, these cards only served as potential finishers in red and blue, but did slightly warp formats as any deck with red or blue would have to be played around, the potential of hybrid for game always being there. The presence of hybrids and top tier strategies would change in BT6 as tier 1 contender Gabumon Bond of Friendship loaded up on blue hybrids, some builds even playing the previously underwhelming ancient Garurumon engine. The potency of hybrids finally displayed itself, as in conjunction with memory-gaining tamers and the new memory boost cards, Gabumon could amass resources that were untouchable by any conventional means, before alpha striking with hybrid after hybrid. This was auspicious because it was a dethroning of at the time Salt Factory security control. Tamers were not able to be interacted with in meaningful ways, short of a few niche cards, Argomon level 6, Neo Devimon Sword Defeat. Now where the hybrid mechanic would change the card game was in BT7, where its power expanded into every color. Sans black, which had been catching the short end of the stick for some time until that point. Boy, sure hope that doesn't change in a set or 2. Red hybrid had its OTK, green hybrid had board control, purple hybrids with recursion, and the 2 contenders for the top spot, blue and yellow hybrid. This serves as a microcosm of how the Digimon card game changes. Hybrids were effectively playing on a different rule set than any other deck. A perfect example of this being the BT7 X Antibody strategy, which while full of well-designed cards, was unable to keep up in a meaningful way. This hybrid format brought back a big resurgence of tamer cards, with many decks playing more than they ever had before, even looking back at somewhat innocuous tamer cards like the starter deck Mat, just to find different ways to get resource generation on board that they could eventually convert back into their hybrid evolutions. Add on the fact that the combination forms would evo for a cost of 1 if there was a tamer in the sources. An opponent on 3 memory could go up into their level 4 hybrid, go into their level 5, which was often the playmaker, and effectively start stabilizing their game plan off of a much more reduced cost. If you want a perfect example of how the gameplay had shifted, you need only look at BT5 and the Lord Nightmon strategy, which by many is considered a tier 0, and then look at the BT7 yellow hybrid strategy, which while not a tier 0 was either the best deck or tied for the best deck with blue hybrid, and just watch how they play. Watch a match of BT5, maybe even just load up some BT5 decks on tabletop, and then do the same with BT7, and you'll get a much different game feel. It was palpable at the time, and not necessarily something players were completely down with. From memories of Digifests I played in personally, it was fairly slow and grindy. Security hits were often bad because it just meant sometimes you were giving your opponents memory boosts or tamers, and just overall, it wasn't the most fun if I'm being honest looking back on it. In a design choice I can only assume was planned in advance by Bandai, BT8 would debut the BlackWargreymon strategy, with both strong defensive utility and most importantly a searchable boss monster that could pop tamers. BT had also provided our first true dual-colored cards, which were significantly better than the previous attempts, both in EX01 and BT3. However, I feel their impact on the game was and is underwhelming. Most decks that utilize or did use them weren't really to bridge around different colors, but already as set archetypes, maybe going into a slightly different boss monster at the top of their stack. And while some have been used for interesting techs, I'm waiting for us to see a contending list that really uses the branching colors to create a unique strategy. There's a lot of potential there. However, Hybrid was resilient enough to stay in contention, even following bannings to one of Blue and Yellow Hybrid's strongest cards. Part of this can be owed to the fact that in Western territories, we tend to hold on to decks a little bit longer than the OCG counterparts, but at the same time, part of it is just on how good Hybrid was still at that point, and is still today. Even all the way up now into BT11, and especially during the Ultimate Cup's color restriction changes for their rulings, Hybrid decks were still being played. It really speaks to the power of that mechanic. All of this speaks to how much the Hybrid mechanic was able to change the game, even with direct counterplay, yet the next major change would come with BT9 and the X Antibody Mechanic. Longtime a fan favorite, the X Antibody variants allowed existing Digimon to go into new forms, often for zero memory. Now some of you may wonder why I skipped over the DNA Digivolution or Jogress mechanic. This is because, to change a game, a mechanic that's simply powerful or useful isn't enough. Hybrids made Digimon matches of building resources, whereas X Antibody would make use of the raising area, similarly unable to be interacted with as Tamers were in the past. Multiple OTK decks presented themselves, setting up Tamers and memory boosts just like the hybrids before them. However, they would eventually promote, taking advantage of both Coolboy and the X Antibody option, and then pushing for a win with a single tower, versus the death by 1,000 cuts finishers that we saw during the hybrid format. There was a pretty major outlier. The previously mentioned X Antibody, now the eponymous Alphamon deck, was able to build on board thanks to the safety of their BlackWargreymon card. BlackWargreymon was also able to take advantage of the new cards and adapted to a controlling strategy, ripping opponents of Tamers and Digimon alike. A critical factor of these new X Antibody decks is that for the most part they built on already existing archetypes. Multiple sets of Doraemon into Alphamon, Greymon, Garurumon cards all set a strong foundation. Furthermore, the new X Antibody option specifically couldn't be stripped, further removing any chances of Blue Hybrid clawing its way back upwards. X Antibody decks were simply playing on different rules, taking a core mechanic, Digivolution, something with an inherent cost, and making it free. Something like ST1 Greymon wasn't just indicative of its own strength, it paired with the new Greymon X, effectively reading as both security attack +1 as well as the protection effect for 2 memory, along with getting an extra associated draw from Digivolution. This isn't even getting into that assistance from Coolboy, a powerful card that has been honestly talked about enough at this point. And this is where our meta has been since then. BT10 gave us the Digicross strategies, and BT11 expanded some more niche archetypes while giving Greymon some more support. X Antibody decks hiding and raising was to the point of power that eventually Greymon caught it banding to 1, as did the BT11 Greymon X, and the most recent Ultimate Cups even saw a unique color restriction rule for list building, effectively hard banning the X Antibody option as well as Coolboy. And with BT12 on the horizon for West, a more diverse meta may display itself. Almost every mechanic is getting some form of support, whether that be hybrids with the new Agunimon strategies, Jogress and the new Imperial Dramon cards, X Antibody forms pairing nicely with the new Greymon and Gallantmon cards, and 2 different decks making utilization of the cross mechanics. However, many Western fans are looking over at the JP format, where the next biggest change may have just been announced. Coming in addition to a mulligan ruling made official, BT14 Blast Age will feature new ACE Digimon, very reminiscent of the Pokemon EX of the past. All ACE Digimon currently come with the Blast Evo mechanic, where they're able to Evo for free on an existing Digimon when your opponent declares an attack. Digimon was long without any form of instant speed interaction, and outside of blocking or security, you really didn't have means to interact with your opponent on their turn. Every color has so far at least one Ace Digimon spoiled, and the effects are potent. Examples like Metal Greymon Ace popping a 6k or less, or Zudomon Ace trashing 2 and then bouncing a sourceless Digimon. And while powerful, they come with a heavy cost. The Overflow mechanic, which caused them to lose memory if they move a zone, currently 3 for the level 5s and 4 for the level 6s from the upcoming starter decks. This includes if they're evoed into a higher form and then deleted, or if they're trashed resources, or even de-digivolved. Bandai is seemingly very careful with these cards initially, not looking to fully warp the meta. However, if TCG players are anything to go by, the power of these free cards can't be ignored. And more so with the counterplay option, I think Digimon will be moving up in complexity as a game. A big issue, as mentioned, with the X Antibody Tower format was that you could just hide in raising and then push for a major alpha strike. If your opponent's promoting their stack that's just going to win the game, you don't really have a means to interact, and ACE Digimon are a step in granting that form of interaction. This is a good thing, because while I have enjoyed the game in its current form, it is run close to exploring most design spaces and would inevitably begin to stagnate if left alone. Another benefit is while only some Digimon possess things like hybrid forms or X Antibody variants or special evolution styles, as designed, any Digimon could be an ace. This could serve to buff weaker strategies, handing them out ace evolutions earlier than others, and giving stronger contention for previously underpowered archetypes. I know some are already testing with the current ace cards, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't staring past our incoming BT12 release with BT14 in full spoiler season. I think this is the best piece of news Digimon has gotten in a while, and I hope moving forward they continue to branch the design decisions they make. A great thing about Digimon has been how even as the game advances, older strategies and cards can still see use. And I think even with Ace, cards from as far back as BT1 can still find relevancy. In 3 years, the game has definitely demonstrated an ebb and flow. This places Digimon in a similar place to Magic, where your cards are rarely fully invalidated. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, complexity and power creep have damaged card games I've enjoyed in the past. For example, I had a brief experience with competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And it seemed after only just months of break, Konami would warp things, either with ban lists or releases, to where it felt like a different game. I think someone who played original Omnimon Turbo coming into BT12 would be able to grasp things much more easily, and that speaks to the consistency of Bandai's design theory even with major changes. Even though things like Hybrid and X Antibody introduce different styles of play, the core of Digimon remained the same, so I don't think it's unreasonable that at a point as they introduce more counterplay options or different styles of cards, we could see a format, kind of like what BT12 is building up to be, where every different style of deck or play style is being used in conjunction, leading to a much more diverse game and a much more fun playing experience. But how do you feel about Digimon from BT1 until now? Do you think Ace are amazing or soon to be a mistake? Please let us know below. And as always, if you like the channel, please share it. We're on the road to 500 subscribers, and seeing so many of you come in to view these videos makes me hyped. This is Tepid with Quarters Games. Stay safe and have a great day.